Good afternoon and warm welcome to everyone to the fourth session of the Build Back Better sector dialogues, today focusing on the water, sanitation and hygiene sector. My name is Mario Unterweinig and I am a former disaster risk management specialist at ADB, and one of my projects was starting with the Build Back Better guidelines for the wash sector. Now I'm working at Vienna Waterworks and I will guide you through the session today. I see my role as a moderator like the GPS of a webinar, keeping the session on the right track, avoiding dead ends, and making sure everyone arrives at the final destination on time. So let's see if I am or we are successful. This webinar series is part of ADB's recently published Build Back Better sector guides, which were published in September last year. You see the link in the chat box, so feel free to download the guidelines. These guidelines provide practical resources to support practitioners, government, and also development organizations to enhance the climate and disaster resilient from communities, infrastructure, and systems through effective post-disaster assistance. So please feel free to download the documents on the chat box on the link. The series held 4 sessions so far, one introduction, one focused on transport, one on the power sector, and one on the irrigation agriculture sector. Today's session will focus on climate and disaster resilient recovery of water, sanitation, and hygiene systems, so-called WASH systems. Before we start, I like to introduce the house rules for today. Please keep your microphone muted unless you are invited to speak. Use the Q&A session chat box in Zoom. If you like to ask a question, I will direct these to the speaker. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And you have already mentioned it, that this session will be recorded and shared after that on the event website. So now I'd like to hand over to Nita Bockrell, Director of Water and Urban Development Sector at ADB, to provide us some opening remarks.
Thank you,
Director Nita leads
Mario.
the Pacific and Southeast Asia regional team at the Urban Water and Development Sector Office of ADB. An engineer by training, water sanitation, climate change, and environmental optimist, and also a passionate development worker. She has over 20 years of professional experience working with various organizations, including ADB, Bowisland, Australia, engineering consulting firms, water utilities, and international NGOs. So you see an impressive CV. So Nita, please go ahead and start with your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. No pressure. But good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone, wherever you're joining us from. It's my great privilege to be here with you today. Partners, clients, I see many people I know already and others I do not, and look forward to hearing from. And me, I'm speaking from ADB's headquarters in Manila, Philippines. Today's session, as Mario said earlier, is the series 5th session of Build Back Better Dialogues. I'm emphasizing on dialogues because I hope you will also follow the trend of keeping it as a dialogue and really giving your thoughts freely. Today's session is anchored on the 3rd volume of Build Back Better Sector Guides. This volume aims to provide ADB stakeholders, ourselves, our client, with practical guidance on delivering effective and well-designed post-disaster assistance in the water, sanitation, and hygiene systems. Personally, as the director supporting Southeast Asia and Pacific regions, the most impacted by disasters in the world. If you look at numbers and people impacted, and also the regions facing extreme threat from climate change. So I really personally want to thank the team who came up with these Build Back Better guides. And Mario, you just told me you were one of them. So very impressed, and I really hope we make best use of them. For an example, we're fielding a mission to Vanuatu. Again, not probably, it is the most disaster impacted country in the world, where one cyclone event can wipe out double digits of the country's GDP. So we can really get a lot out of these guides. So today we'll highlight in the session the importance of how we design these systems with climate resilience and disaster risk in mind from day one, and especially after disasters. Just a couple of minutes on why we are doing this. So already we said we are the most disaster impacted region. Climate change is placing additional pressures in our region on scarce water resources, and it's impacting the fragility of our wash systems, which are again already quite a lot that we need to still do and cover. Globally, 2 billion people currently lack access to wash systems. As many of you know, many of you are practitioners here, and 1.2 billion are devoid of basic sanitation services. So again, if you put that into already the most disaster impacted or facing region, you can see the gravity of what we are facing here in terms of disaster impacts and the need to build well and build back better. The increase in frequency and severity of extreme weather we have seen in the past decades really increase. Where I am in Manila, again, it's the hottest. It's been the most fragile, and I just gave example of Vanuatu that recently faced another cyclone. And deterioration of water systems we also see very fast and in our region because of this disaster facing and vulnerability that we see. And as we know, they can proliferate the spread of water-related diseases such as cholera, acute water diarrhea, typhoid, and further perpetuate vector-borne diseases post-disasters. Just recently, we had COVID-19. And some of the countries, we had cyclones and disasters, multiple disasters at the same time. So triple disasters in the times of COVID, and hence the need to really make sure that we look at how we do it better and build it back better. At this point, I also want to just pause and remind ourselves the importance of first designing the systems, the wash systems pre-pandemic well, with resilience left, right, and center in mind, because resilient systems won't be washed off easily, and hence the need to build back is lessened. So with this in mind, and I look forward to hearing more from the experts, and I really hope these guides that we have got, we've also got our Strategy 2030 focus outlaid as our water and sanitation sector approach and strategy. We have a directional guide that came out 2 years back. We also have a roadmap on post-disaster or disaster planning in our countries. And they do provide us further guide and specific actions in how we can invest in adaptation measures such as flood protection. Again, better water systems, well-designed water systems are one of the most important adaptation measures. So without further ado, I hand it back to Mario, and I wish you a really great and two-way and learning session today. Please share your insights and your experiences on how we can work together, how we can amplify by working together when we build back better, and thus promote sustainable and resilient wash systems as part of our disaster recovery as our broader development efforts. Thank you very much, Mario. Over to you.
Thanks, Nita, for your opening remarks. You will be not available for the Q&A session, so that's a pity, but we will try to answer the questions with the other participants. So I think it's quite important what you said, that post-disaster recovery and ADB supports that, because an infrastructure bank like ADB should be interested by its origin in Build Back Better post-disaster recovery, also including the most important stakeholder and taking an holistic approach, leaving no one behind, and also having a roadmap how Asia can handle all these future challenges. So I think ADB is on the right track with the BBB sector guidelines, especially for the wash sector, because wash sector is a crucial sector for us humans and also for the society. So now to get a bit more about the background of our audience today, let's start with a short poll. The poll will be flashed on your screen. Please choose one of these options, just one. I will read them, which are the wash sector resilience you have been most involved in, site hazard and catchment planning, water system capacity building, accessibility and integration of wash services improvement, also resilient water supply, treatment, distribution and management, resilient sanitation, wastewater and hygiene infrastructure. So please take or choose one question or one answer.
You're on mute.
So Michelle, maybe you can share the results of the poll with us so that we have a good overview where does the people come from and what experience they have with wash sector resilience. So I can't see the results. So maybe I use my mobile phone. So maybe that's the reason why. Maybe you can share it via email so that I can reflect on that via email.
Hi, Margie, sure. Can I unmute my mic? I see the results. 35% were the majority.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
I see the results. I think 35% of the audience are involved in resilient distribution and supply and planning of the systems, just for the benefit of the audience. But yeah, really good, varied distribution working in all subsectors of WASH.
So thank you. You already gave us the summarization of the poll. So thank you for that. Sorry for that, because I had some troubles with my laptop, so I have to use my mobile phone, which has maybe some difficulties. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. This is Vita Sanderson, to provide us an overview of the key principles and solutions on the Build Back Better guide for the wash sector. Vita is a chartered structural engineer, currently works at Arup, where she supports development clients on the implementation of infrastructure, particularly in health and education. And she is currently also the chair of the board at the Médecins Sans Frontières. This is the Doctors Without Borders operating headquarters in Amsterdam, which has governance over programming decisions of their portfolio of humanitarian response projects globally. Vita was the co-author for the Build Back Better sector guide on WASH. I think you did a great job on supporting ADB with these, or with especially this WASH sector guide. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mario. So sharing the screen. Great. So thanks, everybody. It's really nice to be here presenting on this volume of the WASH chapter. So really pleased to kind of talk you through some of the the approach and the measures that were developed for the volume. And I'll rattle through them quite quickly so that we've got some time for questions at the end. But yeah, so as Nita kind of referred to in her opening remarks, you know, safe management and access to water is so key to ensure human safety and health. And as it's such a basic human right in a post-disaster phase, it's often kind of on a much more accelerated and phased and complex sort of programming design and requirements. And that sort of complexity and accelerated programming is sort of additionally pressured by, you know, scarce water resources that result from climate change, as well as whatever sort of happened in terms of the sort of disaster event itself. So in terms of the objectives of kind of what we've sort of set out as the key objectives in Building Back Better for WASH. Firstly, it's really to think about sustainable and adaptable solutions, really making sure that they're promoting kind of broader environmental benefit, as well as nature-based water management and sort of renewable energy driven systems. Secondly, is to reduce the impact on sort of connected infrastructure, so that any failure in WASH systems don't cascade into areas such as energy, transport, for example, sort of ensuring that we don't disrupt energy transmission or damage roads or other sort of connected infrastructure. It's important to think about establishing new value chains in the Build Back Better space. So to ensure that you get sort of new climate and disaster resilient pathways through the infrastructure that's reconstructed post-disaster. So that could be, you know, thinking about how material from on-site sanitation systems that could be reused sort of as fertilizer once it's appropriately treated, and sort of thinking about ways to contribute to a circular economy. Adopting new technology and innovation once that better outcome is reached. So thinking about how that can be leveraged to achieve better outcomes, things like sensors to monitor the infrastructure, and kind of how that can continue over time. And lastly, but most importantly, is to make sure that there's safe and equitable and affordable access to WASH services for all. So, you know, the drive to improve health and living standards with special attention to the needs of the sort of poorest groups, women, children, older people, and those with disabilities. So as we heard from Nita earlier, there is, you know, the water sector is a significant proportion of all the disaster kind of effects and recovery needs. The table on the screen shows you some examples from the PDNAs of some disasters in the region, and sort of showing that the proportion of the water recovery, across many sectors provides a significant portion, and that is really due to this interconnectedness and urgent need. So in terms of the sort of key considerations, thinking about how the phasing of this implementation can present challenges is key, because the system itself is so urgent. There's a need to make sure that it's not just thinking about what the solution is, but how it will be implemented whilst maintaining service provision during that implementation phase. Additionally, rainfall during the reconstruction phase, typically a key issue because of the timing of the disaster incident, and then thinking about then the link between both a temporary and a long-term solution. So, and then that means then that incorporating that temporary workaround solution, things that get put in sort of right immediate phase, needs to either be upgraded and integrated into the sort of final solution or the sort of reconstructed solution, or it needs to be replaced but without losing provision. And then the last one is really to think about the need to consider differentiated WASH requirements. So, different cultural, religious beliefs of affected populations can really affect the solutions that are required. There might be differentiated needs between local communities and displaced groups, and taboo topics like menstruation might not be well kind of understood by all stakeholders. So important to kind of think about the different requirements across the group. So in terms of Build Back Better measures, we have kind of split these into thinking about two sort of main types of measures. One is the measures that kind of apply to the system-wide, and WASH is really a system. It's all the different pieces are interconnected, and each element of resilience is tied to the next one. So there are a number of things that are kind of to think about across the system itself as a whole. And then the second is measures that apply to specific elements of the system itself. So looking at either supply, storage, sanitation, or surface water management. So I'll just run through these quite quickly, one by one, so that we have a chance to kind of talk about them a bit later. But firstly, thinking about the system capacity building. So there's multiple stakeholders involved within the WASH value chain. So that might be sort of from the water source to the wastewater treatment. And this is an opportunity to kind of strengthen the resilience of that sort of multi-stakeholder landscape. Additionally, WASH is often very close to the community, and it's an opportunity for them to play a key role, although it's important that that is coupled with the appropriate kind of capacity building on the system maintenance and how it's sort of designed to be used in future. Site hazard and catchment planning. So this is really key to think about for site-specific multi-hazard risk. So looking at the different areas of risk that the whole catchment might be exposed to, thinking about upstream and downstream systems from the one that is specifically under reconstruction at that moment. It may be, depending on the scale of the reconstruction, that a lot of that catchment is under reconstruction, or maybe there's just an affected part. But that means that the reconstruction works are kind of important to think about what is the impact of those works on the catchment, as well as the risks to the system itself. And thirdly is to think about improving the accessibility to WASH services. So coming back to that point about providing continuous access, ensuring that the quick and safe access is provided even in hazard conditions. So if there's still high river flow, for example, and important to consider the sort of needs of women, girls, and other vulnerable groups, you know, that they might be facing increased barriers or reduced access to services. As I sort of mentioned, being aware of topics that might be taboo or not necessarily understood by wider community means that sort of thinking about wider stakeholder consultation is really important during the first phases. And then this last point is kind of coming back to one of those objectives that I mentioned at the beginning around the integration of WASH into wider infrastructure systems, social infrastructure, transport, industry, energy, food, livelihoods, health. You know, they all depend on, you know, quality water systems to function safely and resiliently. So considering the cascading impacts and identifying sort of opportunities to supplement centralized systems with decentralized systems, for example, to make sure that that sort of impacts don't cascade down into other areas, and building in redundancy within the system as well. So those are the sort of the four sort of system-wide areas, and now I'll touch briefly on the component-specific measures. So in terms of resilient water and supply and treatment, really key to have independent and good water quality, good quality raw water sources, and the quality of the source reduces the demand on the treatment, thinking about sealing wells and boreholes to make sure you don't get infiltration, sizing treatment systems for future needs or temporary demand increases, such as influxes of displaced people, and sort of really thinking about the robustness of the materiality of what is being put in to make sure that those kind of can continue to function even in future disaster events. In terms of storage and distribution, considering decentralized storage to make sure that there's supply with reserves, putting in flow control valves so that reconstruction can be phased or areas can be reconstructed or repaired in isolation from the rest of the system, thinking about monitoring and reducing consumption to kind of reduce the demand on the system and reducing the loss of non-revenue water, which is everything that has everything that's lost kind of before it reaches the consumer, as it were. And lastly, prioritizing gravity systems, which reduces sort of risks of pump malfunction, or kind of other sort of system issues, electrical failure that might kind of then render the water and sanitation systems ineffective. The seventh measure is to think about surface water management. So in this sort of connected system, the surface water management is as much part of the WASH system as the supply and the sanitation. So thinking about having a data-driven approach to the drainage design to make sure it's sized appropriately and has the right kind of capacity to deal with future storm or flood events. If possible, separating storm and grey water from sewerage, which kind of separates the sort of reduces the risk of contamination, and reduces the risk of waterborne disease if you can separate those two systems. And lastly, kind of thinking about integrated flood risk management measures and incorporating nature-based solutions. And these sort of have a sort of multitude of co-benefits, get increased absorption, that reduces your flood risk, lower flows and increased storage capacity, again, then reduce the demand on the system and therefore kind of improve its resilience. In terms of sanitation and wastewater, the key is to start by prioritizing the basic needs, and then sort of gradually improve. So we call this the sanitation ladder, sort of moving up in terms of provision and of sanitation services. thinking about formalizing any decentralized systems. So, you know, there's often the sanitation system isn't governed by a regulatory framework, and this is an opportunity to sort of engage with local stakeholders, legislators, water operators to kind of improve coordination, which inherently will prevent disease transmission and further environmental degradation. And finally, the structures themselves that are part of the wastewater system need to be hazard resilient. So that's thinking about soil stability, including non-return valves, so you don't get sort of contamination, and sealing septic tanks and other kind of structures to make sure that themselves don't become a hazard in future. And finally, thinking about adequate hygiene facilities, so particularly hand washing to prevent sort of disease transmission, and also thinking about the value chain for hygiene products. So how is that supply chain for like soap and menstrual hygiene products? How resilient is that? And is there an opportunity to consider sort of local production to make that more resilient in future? So appreciate a kind of whistle-stop tour through the measures in the guide. But I think just really kind of key to think about them all together as a system and kind of come back to this idea of interconnectedness and measures that kind of affect the system, but also kind of strengthen specific areas of it. So with that, I will hand back to you, Mario. Thank you very much. Work out how to stop sharing my screen. Thanks.
So thanks, Vita, for your overview. I think you highlighted it quite clearly that BPB is not just a technical issue, also a social issue. The interconnectedness between water and safe water, the accessibility of wash for all, and also the system-wide approach. So I think these are the main issues you wrote down quite impressive in the Build Back Better guideline and also highlighted in your presentation. So next I'd like to introduce, sorry for that, our case study speaker. This is John Vincent Silio. He is a community development officer at the KALAHI CIDSS National Community Driven Development Project Social Development Unit under the Department of Social Welfare and Development, Government of the Philippines. Vincent is also a registered nurse and has more than 10 years of community development experience. So I think it's great to have such an experienced speaker here who can share their insights from the perspective from a country side and also from a project use, so that we can see that this is not just written on paper and the guidelines, so that it is also can be implemented into practical use. So please, John, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for that introduction. So with me here is DRPM Jerry Pineda, Ma'am Jen Caspe, and Nilmar Balikyan. So I will be sharing to you a case study of the WASH interventions implemented by DSWD through KALAHI CIDSS, National Community Driven Development Program. So next slide, please. So as a background of the study, so the Philippines is situated in the Pacific region, which is also within the Pacific Ring of Fire, wherein we experience several types of disasters such as earthquake, typhoons, and others. So last November 8, 2013, Typhoon Haiyan, or locally known as Typhoon Yolanda or Super Typhoon Yolanda, as they call in our region, made landfall in Region 8. So it was one of the strongest tropical cyclones ever recorded, devastating the provinces of Leyte, Samar, and Eastern Samar. So several homes, buildings, and infrastructures were destroyed, and agricultural and fishing industries, which was the main livelihoods of the region, were severely affected. Thousands of families were also displaced, leading to long-term resettlement efforts. So Typhoon Haiyan severely affected Eastern Samar, including Barangay Casilion, damaging essential infrastructure and disrupting access to clean water. Thus, a safe and reliable water supply is crucial for public health, sanitation, and overall community resilience, especially in disaster-prone areas such as in Region 8. So, through the KALAHI CIDSS National Community-Driven Development Program, with the help of the funding from the Asian Development Bank, funded the prioritized identified intervention of the barangay, particularly in Barangay Casilion, which is the rehabilitation of their water system, which plays a critical role in the post-disaster recovery efforts of the community. So sa project of the Barangay Casilion is also one of the post-disaster recovery efforts of the government, particularly in the local government unit of Salcedo. Next slide, please. So as a background, so KALAHI CIDSS, National Community-Driven Development, aims to rehabilitate and strengthen disaster-affected communities through community-driven initiatives. So in our program, the KALAHI CIDSS, we utilize the community-driven approach as the platform in the implementation of different interventions from the identified problems of the community, particularly post-disaster. Water system solve projects in Barangay Casilion, Salcedo, Eastern Samar, as part of the post-recovery efforts addresses the critical need for clean water, ensuring that affected communities also could rebuild stronger and become more resilient for future disasters. Next slide. So the impact of the disaster on the wash. So previously, before the onslaught of Typhoon Yolanda, the community residents of Barangay Casilion primarily used their deep well and level 1 water system or their geotmatic pumps. It was their primary source of water supply for their domestic use, particularly for their daily household and personal needs, including their hygiene practices. So upon the disaster of the typhoon, it causes structural damage that severely affected their water system or their water supply system, thus affecting the use of the services in the community. So primarily, the household residents would take time in fetching their water because their primary source, which is the deep well, is very far from their households, thus needing to cater all the 131 households way back in 2014. Primarily, with these pressing problems, women and children are primarily affected because they are the ones who primarily use the water services, especially that this is also part of their chores or their household chores. Next slide, please. So as to the wash interventions, so through the KALAHI CIDSS implementation, during the participatory situational analysis, wherein the communities identify their problems out from the disaster that happened from the Super Typhoon Yolanda, which utilizes their rapid damage assessment and needs analysis results, the barangay identified problems in their wash services. So the community identified priority interventions of rehabilitating their water supply system. So through the KALAHI CIDSS, the community were able to propose their level 1 water system to be upgraded to level 2, which will cater now to become a better and safer water supply system for their community needs and demands. So through the funding of the Asian Development Bank, the community identified the problem that was given intervention in rehabilitating of their existing water system. So upon the inception of the proposal, so the communities, particularly the community residents, primarily administer and facilitate the what we call the willingness to avail and pay forms, wherein the communities are asked if ever they will be able to sustain the sub-project or the water system by merely giving out a tariff or fees for the consumption of their water supply. So another one is the community also prepare for the community water safety plan. As part of the proposal, the community are able to identify a safety plan wherein the community identifies interventions or the factors that will help them to better implement the sub-project at the same time in the operation and maintenance activities of the water supply system. So another one, it's part of their intervention since there is relevance to disaster response and recovery, wherein primarily water supply is one of the efforts of the government to be recovered after disaster because it is one of the basic needs of the community. Next slide. So with the concept of the Build Back Better on WASH interventions, so particularly the WASH interventions encourages community engagement and community participation. It also empowers the local community in their decision-making process, wherein vulnerable sectors, such as the women and elders, were involved in the planning process, which, with the considerations on their special needs in terms of water accessibility. So in terms of risk reduction, there were a series of tests that were conducted to identify the potability of the supply, if it is safe to be used by the households. At the same time, there were conducts of site validation to assess potential risks and hazards within the source or the site of the water source. At the same time, the distribution lines that will be serving the community. At the same time, upon the completion of the sub-projects, the community associations wherein the Barangay Casilion established with the name of Kawasa or the Casilion Water System Association continually monitor the sub-projects as to its operation and management for the continued delivery of services, especially in times of disasters where there is higher need of water. Especially that there was also the pandemic that happened. So there is really the need of the water supply system as part of the hygiene practices in the community. So another one, in terms of local leadership, so there were series of consultation meetings and active participation from the community. So series of meetings were conducted from the identification of the intervention until the development of the proposal, until its operation and maintenance. So the community are really involved in the decision-making process as to the interventions they identified, which is their water system. There were also dialogues or meetings or consultations with the municipal engineers as to the considerations in the technical design of the sub-project. Particularly, there were tests that was conducted like the hydraulic analysis to assess whether the pressure can help the community to better access, especially in those farther areas from the water source. So There were consultations with the technical experts in terms of the procurement of appropriate materials that will be more resilient in the future needs of the community. So in terms of capacity building or capacity development of the community, so the KALAHI seeds, CIDSS, provided capacity development or capacity building to the community association, which is the KAWASA in particular, regarding the operation and maintenance activities. So these associations were capacitated in terms of the operational management of the sub-project. At the same time, they were given technical know-how on how to preserve the services of the water supply system they have implemented. So they were given technical know-how on the preparation of what we call the operation and maintenance program that serves them as their guide in the operational activity. So in that program, there are technical considerations at the same time as to the organizational aspects for the community to better manage their association for the implementation of their O&M or the operation and maintenance. And lastly, in terms of inclusion and equity, so there is the involvement of the women and girls and the vulnerable sectors in decision making. So the communities are there to participate in all the decision in terms of their operational activity of the sub-project they have implemented, which is their water system. So the voices of these vulnerable sectors are heard and given equal opportunities and importance during the decision-making process.
So thanks, John, for your presentation on Build Back Better, the case study for KALAHI CIDSS National Community Driven Development. Because I think in two main points, it's great to see how you achieved the community participation, and also what is important for me as a water engineer, you also highlighted the implementation of the water safety planning, which we also use in Europe. For instance, in our water work, we are responsible for 2 million people, and so the water safety planning approach is a excellent approach on every level for water works on water supply. So now please post your questions to our speakers in the Q&A chat box, and we will share them after the presentation. So feel free to share your questions. In between, I will start with one question to Vita. Vita, resilient recovery and reconstruction primarily requires ensuring a clear understanding of the wash value chain. So what are the suggested strategy in boosting understanding and adoption of resilient recovery and reconstruction for wash services?
Thanks, Mario. So yeah, as you point out, that system approach and understanding the system is really key. And there's a number of important kind of steps in terms of understanding that, a number of which you heard about in the case study. So engaging with sort of the existing stakeholder framework. So that might be not just the community that is affected, but also upstream and downstream stakeholders, from legislators potentially to operators, and really understanding kind of the interconnectivity through potentially understanding where there have been failures in the past, thinking about the kind of the hydraulic landscape. So that might be some modeling that needs to be done in terms of understanding that catchment, so that measure that I mentioned earlier. and really thinking about how if one element fails, how you can make sure that that there is enough either redundancy or robustness in the system to make sure that that doesn't then continue to affect other parts of the system while you reinstate the failed element.
So thanks, Vita, for answering the first question. Another question for Vincent is, could you share if there were some challenges encountered in engaging local stakeholders and communities in adopting wash services? How did the government address this issue? Thank you.
Hi, Mario. I'm so sorry, but it seems like Vincent got disconnected, but we're trying to call him again. Thank you.
So I think we have a question from Gufran. Much of the objective and measures given in Vita's PowerPoint for Build Back Better are most same we have for any new construction. What are some of the differentiated approaches in reconstruction and new construction? So maybe Vita, you can share or answer this question, please, for Gufran.
Thanks, and thanks, Gufran, for the question. I think, a lot of the kind of technical measures, you're right, are the same because it's the same type of infrastructure that you need to keep going between, in a disaster event. But I think the key differences for the reconstruction is that service provision and the phased approach that I mentioned at the beginning. So thinking about how any temporary solutions that may have been put in place immediately post-disaster, or if those don't exist, how to get that immediate service provision in a kind of less than ideal way, sometimes needed, and then integrating that into a longer term solution. And it's that complexity of the phasing that is the key difference between the reconstruction and the new construction, where your final solution may need to be adapted to make sure that you can incorporate things that exist either already or that you need to put in place for a temporary solution in an immediate or short-term phase.
Thanks, Vita. In between, I have seen that Vincent is already here. So Vincent, one question for you. Could you share if there were challenges encountered in engaging local stakeholders and communities in adopting these wash services? How did the governments could address this?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. So one of the challenges that were encountered were in terms of securing the water permits from the NWRP, because there were challenges of the community in securing those permits from the National Water Works Resources Bureau, because there are series of steps that need to be undertaken by the community before they give the permit in terms of the interventions of the WASH. But in terms naman of the support of the local government unit, particularly the barangays, including the municipal local government unit, helps them in the processing of the documents, at the same time in securing those documents for them to have the said permits. Another one in terms of the challenges is the conduct of the surveys for the detailed engineering design, which causes limitations as to the equipment, like survey equipment, because the communities do not have those highly technical equipments that will help them better know the condition of their water supply system in the design or the preparation of their proposals. But with the help of the local government unit, particularly the engineering office, they also give support through provision of those available equipments from them. At the same time, the technical know-how from the municipal engineers are given to the communities who had identified such interventions. So thank you po.
So thank you, Vincent. I have another question for you because you are a nurse. So what role does play Build Back Better in enhancing hygiene practices in healthcare facilities? So maybe you could give us a short answer on that, if possible.
Come again, sir?
So you are a nurse, or you were a nurse, so you have experience in that. So what role does Build Back Better play in enhancing hygiene practice in healthcare facilities like hospitals? Why it is so important to implement WASH also for these healthcare facilities? Maybe you can give us a few words on that.
Okay, so the importance of WASH interventions in any facility or even in the community, because it helps the community to prevent from waterborne diseases, or even what we call the communicable diseases that can be transmitted through handling. So such hygiene practices like hand washing is necessary to be implemented or to be available not only in hospital setting but also in community settings, because particularly in community there is what we call the residents that can commonly be affected by such disease. At the same time, it is also important that there are information dissemination campaigns to the community in terms of the hygiene practices, also to prevent them from harboring diseases or communicable diseases in particular. Thank you po.
Thanks. I think we have another question in the chat box from Carlo. I think it's more related to Vita, but maybe Vincent, you can always also share your perspective from the Philippine side. In rural areas where water sources are becoming scarce, will you advise the use of desalination for non-human consumption to avoid over extraction? So maybe Vita, you can start with the answer if possible.
Yeah. Hi, Carlo. So but my answer is going to be it depends in short, but you know, as I spoke about ensuring that diversified water supply source and desalination can play a part in that, I think that it depends, because there are other kind of risks and side effects that need to be considered to decide whether that is the appropriate solution for that kind of community or that area. So particularly it's a very energy intensive process, so thinking about where that energy is coming from, and if we go back to that point about the sort of sustainable and adaptable solutions, how that might be able, you know, where that energy is coming from. I think the impact of desalination creates the brine, and where that goes afterwards is also another consideration. So it can be a solution to diversify water sources, and it can be really kind of an effective way to avoid over extraction, as you pointed out, but it does need to be assessed properly on a site specific basis to make sure that the kind of the risks associated with the extraction process can be safely mitigated.
So thanks, Vita. Maybe
Vincent, I don't know if you wanted
Vincent,
to add
you
anything.
have something to add. Otherwise, I have another question for you, as you like. So Vincent, I will ask you another question. If possible, you can answer it. I received it by email. This is from Vicky for the KALAHI CIDSS project. 10 years after the project was implemented, was the community able to maintain the operation and maintenance of the water supply system? And what are the key factors that lead to this success? So maybe you can give us a short answer on that. That will be great. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you for that question. No, the community association, the KAWASA or the Kasilion Water System Association, really maintains the operation and maintenance activities of the sub-project. So one of the factors that help them to better manage their water supply system is that they had secured legal identity. So the association registered to the Department of Labor and Employment, which formed them to better help them to be organized. At the same time, they were given enough support from the local government units in terms of the operational costs. So they were given at least thousands, roughly estimate is 10 to 15,000 for the operational cost in terms of rehabilitation, or if there are damages or if there are for repairs. So they were given such amount at the same time from the local government unit of the LGU of Salcedo. So those were the factors that helped them better manage their project or their water supply throughout the 10 years. Thank you po.
Thanks, Vincent. So now I think we are at the end of today's session on Build Back Better of the WASH session. Thank you very much for everyone joining today, and also for this good discussion and conversation. The presentations and the event recording will be uploaded on the Event Air website. So please see the link in the chat box. The next Build Back Better sector dialogue focusing on the social infrastructure will happen next month. So please check our website for more details. And I think ADB's Building Back Better initiative focusing on rebuilding communities and economies by investing in infrastructure, clean energy, and also social programs to create a more resilient and also inclusive and sustainable future is the right and the best approach to improve Asia's welfare and economic growth. So thank you again for participating and having a great rest of your day. So bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.